Imagine this. In the shadow of America's darkest hour, a young woman of 19 is auctioned off, not for her labor, but for her untouched purity, to a widowed stranger, with secrets darker than the night. He offers her a family, a home, whispers of kindness. But what if that home was a cage, and that family, a weapon? This is the untold story of Amelia Hawthorne, a tale of deception, unbreakable love, and a revenge so calculated it would burn a monster to ash. Buckle up, because what starts as a dream of escape ends in a firestorm of justice that changed lives forever. My name is Amelia, and I was 19 years old when they sold my virginity along with my body to a man who spoke in a foreign tongue and promised salvation. It was the autumn of 1848 in Virginia, where the leaves turned gold and red like the flames that would eventually consume my captor. Though I didn't know it then. I had been raised on Reverend Blackwood's plantation, a place where scripture was quoted as frequently as the whip was used, where slaves were taught to read the Bible, but forbidden to question its interpretation. The Reverend prided himself on running a Christian establishment, which meant we attended mandatory prayer services twice daily, and were beaten for any behavior deemed sinful. The plantation sat on 2,500 acres of Virginia's most fertile soil, worked by nearly 150 souls who lived in conditions that would have shamed the devil himself. The slave quarters were rows of wooden shacks with dirt floors and no windows, each housing entire families in spaces barely large enough for a single person. Disease spread like wildfire through these cramped conditions, and the mortality rate was so high that new slaves were purchased regularly to replace those who died. But I was different. I was what they called house-raised, kept away from the field hands, educated enough to read and write, and most importantly, kept pure for a special purpose. The Reverend had plans for me that went beyond ordinary slavery. He intended to sell me as a virgin slave to wealthy men who paid premium prices for such merchandise. My quarters were in the attic of the big house, a small but clean room with an actual bed and a window that looked out over the cotton fields. I was given better food than the field slaves, proper clothing, and even basic medical care when I fell ill. This preferential treatment came with a price. Absolute isolation from other slaves and constant supervision to ensure my purity remained intact. "Amelia," the Reverend would say during my religious instruction, "the Lord has blessed you with beauty and purity. These gifts must be preserved for His greater purpose." I understood even then that His greater purpose had nothing to do with God and everything to do with gold. The Reverend was a businessman first and a man of God second, and I was his most valuable asset. My education was carefully controlled. I could read the Bible fluently, write in a neat hand, and perform basic arithmetic. I knew French phrases that would impress potential buyers, could play simple melodies on the piano, and had been trained in all the domestic skills that wealthy men expected from their household slaves. But I knew nothing of the world beyond the plantation, nothing of politics or current events, nothing that might give me ideas about freedom or resistance. The other slaves on the plantation viewed me with a mixture of envy and pity. They envied my comfortable living conditions and relative safety from the overseer's whip. But they pitied my isolation and the fate that awaited me. Old Martha, who worked in the kitchen, would sometimes slip me extra food and whisper warnings about the world beyond the plantation. "Child," she would say, her voice barely audible, "you got book learning and pretty clothes, but you still property. Don't never forget that. And property gets sold when the master needs money." Her words proved prophetic when the Reverend's gambling debts finally caught up with him. I learned of my impending sale, not from him directly, but from overhearing a conversation between him and his overseer, Mr. Grimes. "The German fellow is willing to pay $1,200, Grimes was saying as I dusted the hallway outside the study. "That's more than we've ever gotten for a single slave." "Amelia is worth every penny," the Reverend replied. 19 years old, pure as the driven snow, educated and trained in all the domestic arts. Becker knows quality when he sees it. What's he want with her? He ain't got no plantation to speak of. He's got 2 children who need a mother figure, and he's got other needs that a wife can't fulfill in polite society. The casual way they discussed my future, as if I were a piece of livestock being sold at market, filled me with a cold dread that settled in my stomach like a stone. I had always known this day would come, but hearing it discussed so matter-of-factly made it real in a way that terrified me. The auction took place not in the public slave market, but in the Reverend's private study, where 3 potential buyers examined me like livestock. They checked my teeth, felt my arms for strength, and asked invasive questions about my monthly cycles and physical development. I stood silent through it all as I had been trained to do, my eyes fixed on a painting of Jesus on the wall behind the Reverend's desk. The winning bidder was Wilhelm Becker, a German immigrant who spoke broken English with a thick accent. He was a man of perhaps 48 years with graying hair and calloused hands that spoke of skilled labor rather than plantation ownership. Unlike the other bidders, he didn't examine me physically. Instead, he asked me questions. "How you can read, ya?" he asked in his heavily accented English. "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "And write, you know numbers." "Yes, sir." "Gut, very gut." He turned to Reverend Blackwood. "I take her. On $200 as discussed." The transaction was completed with the same casual efficiency as buying a horse or a piece of furniture. Papers were signed, money changed hands, and suddenly I belonged to a stranger who spoke a language I didn't understand. The Reverend didn't even look at me as I was led away, already counting his money and planning how to spend it. As we traveled west toward the Shenandoah Valley in Becker's wagon, he explained my new situation in his broken English, mixed with German phrases I was beginning to recognize. The wagon was well made and comfortable, with cushioned seats and a canvas cover to protect us from the elements. Becker's clothes were of good quality, and his horse was well fed and healthy. All signs that he was a man of some means. "I am clockmaker," he said, his hands steady on the reins. "I have shop in town, house and country. Minor, my children. They need mother. You understand? Mother figure." "Yes, sir," I replied, though I wasn't sure I understood anything. "Mine are from my wife. She died 2 years past. Fever took her. Carl and Gretchen. They are gut children, but they need woman's care. You will be this for them." "Yeah." The way he spoke of his children with genuine sadness and concern made me think that perhaps my new life would be different from what I had expected. Perhaps this foreign man with his strange accent would be kinder than the masters I had known. "What are their ages, sir?" I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. "Carl is 13, Gretchen 11. They speak mostly Deutsch, German, but they learn English. You will help with this?" "Yeah." "I will do my best, sir." "Gut. You will find I am fair master. I do not use whip unless necessary. You work hard, care for my children, and you will be treated well." As we traveled through the Virginia countryside, I began to see a different world from the one I had known on the plantation. Small farms dotted the landscape, worked by families rather than gangs of slaves. Towns appeared with increasing frequency, bustling with commerce and activity. The people we passed on the road were a mixture of races and nationalities. German immigrants like Becker, Irish laborers, free blacks, and native-born Americans, all sharing the same roads and markets. The Shenandoah Valley was beautiful in a way that took my breath away. Rolling hills covered in autumn foliage stretched to the horizon, broken by clear streams and fertile farmland. The air was crisp and clean, free of the oppressive humidity and ever-present smell of human misery that had characterized the plantation. As we approached Becker's property, I saw a modest but well-maintained house, surrounded by apple orchards and vegetable gardens. It was smaller than the plantation I had come from, but it seemed more like a home than a prison. Smoke rose from the chimney, and I could see 2 figures watching from the front porch. Carl was tall for his age, with his father's sandy hair and serious expression. He stood with the careful posture of a boy trying to be a man, his clothes neat and well-mended. Gretchen was smaller with blonde braids and curious blue eyes that reminded me of cornflowers. She clutched a worn doll to her chest and peered at me with the frank curiosity of childhood. Both children stared at me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness as their father introduced me. They had clearly been expecting someone, but I could see uncertainty in their faces, uncertainty about what my presence would mean for their family. "Kinder. This is Amelia. She will live with us now, help take care of house and you both." "Guten Tag," Gretchen said shyly, then switched to English. "Good day." Good day, I replied, smiling at her attempt to use my language. Carl said nothing but nodded politely. I could see the pain in his eyes, the look of a boy who had lost his mother and wasn't sure he wanted a replacement. That first evening, as I prepared dinner under Becker's direction, I began to understand the household dynamics. The children were well behaved, but clearly starved for maternal affection. They helped with chores without being asked, spoke quietly at dinner, and seemed grateful for any attention I gave them. The house itself was comfortable and well appointed, with real glass windows, wooden floors, and furniture that spoke of craftsmanship and care. Becker's workshop occupied one end of the building, filled with the tools and materials of his trade. The smell of oil and metal mixed with the more domestic sense of cooking food and wood. Amelia will sleep in the small room upstairs, Becker announced as we finished eating. Tomorrow she will begin learning our ways. The room he showed me was simple but clean, with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the apple orchard. It was luxury beyond anything I had experienced as a slave. For the first time in my life, I had privacy, comfort, and what seemed like genuine kindness from my owner. Danke, I said, using one of the German words I had picked up during our journey. Becker smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him. You learn quick. This is gut. Sleep well, Amelia. Tomorrow we begin new life. As I lay in that comfortable bed, listening to the sounds of a peaceful household settling down for the night, I allowed myself to hope. Perhaps I had found something I had never dared dream of. A family. Perhaps this strange German man with his motherless children would be different from other masters I had known. The house was quiet, except for the gentle ticking of clocks from Becker's workshop, a sound that would become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. Outside my window, the apple trees rustled in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of water running over stones. I was 19 years old, sold for my purity to a foreign stranger. But for the first time in my life, I felt something approaching happiness. The children needed me, and I was beginning to realize how much I needed them. It would be 6 months before I learned the true horror of Wilhelm Becker's intentions. 6 months before I understood that kindness could be the cruelest trap of all. And 6 months before I began planning the revenge that would consume everything he held dear. But that night in my comfortable bed in my own room, I was simply a young woman who dared to hope for love in a world that had shown her only cruelty. It was a beautiful dream while it lasted. The spring would bring truth, and with it the beginning of my transformation from victim to avenger. But that autumn night was mine, and I held it close to my heart like a precious secret, even as the man who owned me planned my destruction with the same careful precision he used to craft his clocks. The months that followed were the happiest of my life, though I would later understand they were built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. Wilhelm Becker proved to be everything I had hoped for in a master, kind, patient, and genuinely concerned for his children's welfare. More importantly, he seemed to value me as a person rather than mere property. My days fell into a comfortable routine that began before dawn and ended long after sunset. But unlike the back-breaking labor of plantation life, my work felt meaningful and appreciated. I would wake to the sound of Becker moving about in his workshop below, the gentle ticking of his clocks providing a soothing rhythm to start each day. Breakfast was always a family affair, with Carl and Gretchen joining their father and me around the kitchen table. Becker would speak softly with me about the day's plans, while the children still rubbed sleep from their eyes, his English gradually improving as he made an effort to communicate more clearly. "Today we go to town," he might say, his accent still thick, but his words more carefully chosen. "You will meet Frau Zimmermann. She teaches you about our community." "Gut, Amelia," he would say when I managed a particularly difficult German word. "You have natural gift for languages." The children warmed to me gradually, their initial wariness melting away as they realized I genuinely cared for their welfare. Carl, despite his serious demeanor, was actually quite intelligent and curious about the world beyond their small valley. I helped him with his English lessons, reading aloud from books that Becker had brought from Germany, and in return, he taught me about his father's clockmaking trade. "Papa says time is the most precious thing," he told me one afternoon as we watched Becker work in his shop, his young face serious with the weight of this wisdom. Because once it passes, you can never get it back. That's very wise, I replied, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove to be. Carl showed me how the delicate mechanisms worked, the way tiny gears and springs could be assembled to mark the passage of hours with perfect precision. There was something almost magical about watching Becker's skilled hands shape metal and wood into instruments that could capture time itself. Gretchen was more openly affectionate, often seeking my approval for her drawings, or asking me to braid her hair in new styles. She'd been only 9 when her mother died, and I could see how desperately she craved maternal attention. Her room was filled with dolls and drawings, many of which depicted a family of 4, a father, a mother, and 2 children. "Amy," she said one evening as I tucked her into bed, using the shortened version of my name that had become her pet name for me. "Will you sing to me like Mama used to?" I didn't know any German lullabies, so I sang the spirituals I had learned in the slave quarters, translating them into stories about hope and protection. Gretchen would fall asleep with a smile on her face, and I would feel a warmth in my chest that I had never experienced before. "Sleep now, little one," I would whisper, smoothing her blonde hair. "Tomorrow will bring new adventures." Becker encouraged this growing bond between the children and me. He would often comment on how much happier Carl and Gretchen seemed, how their laughter had returned to the house after 2 years of grief and mourning. "You are a gift from God," he told me one evening, as we watched the children play in the garden, their voices carrying on the autumn air. "They have not been so happy since their mother died." I began to think of myself not as a slave, but as a member of the family. Becker never used harsh words with me, never raised his hand, never reminded me of my status as property. When neighbors visited, he introduced me as our Amelia, who helps with the children, never using the word slave. The German community in the valley was small but close-knit, and they seemed to accept me as part of Becker's household without question. Perhaps it was because I was clearly devoted to Carl and Gretchen, or perhaps because Becker's grief over his wife's death had earned him their sympathy and support. I learned that his wife, Eliza, had been beloved in the community. She had been a skilled seamstress and herbalist, known for her kindness to neighbors and her devotion to her family. The women would sometimes mention her to me, sharing stories of her generosity and wisdom. Eliza would be happy to know her children are so well cared for. Mrs. Zimmerman told me one Sunday after church, her weathered hands gentle as she touched my arm. "You have brought light back to that house." These words filled me with pride and purpose. I was not just surviving, I was thriving, creating something meaningful with my life. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be needed, to be valued for more than just physical labor. The work itself was demanding but satisfying. I cooked meals that the family actually enjoyed, mended clothes with care and attention to detail, and maintained a household that felt like a home rather than a prison. Becker taught me to keep accounts, to manage the household budget, and even to assist him with his clock-making business by organizing his tools and materials. "You have steady hands," he observed one day, as I helped him sort tiny screws and springs. "Perhaps you learned to help with delicate work, yeah?" The idea of learning a skilled trade excited me in a way I hadn't expected. On the plantation, slaves were kept deliberately ignorant, taught only enough to perform their assigned tasks. Here, Becker seemed genuinely interested in developing my abilities and intelligence. As winter approached, I noticed changes in the household that seemed to confirm my growing importance. Becker began asking my opinion on matters beyond childcare: what crops to plant in the spring, how to arrange the furniture in the parlor, whether Carl was ready for more advanced mathematics. "You have wise head," he would say, his English improving daily. Eliza always said 2 minds think better than 1. The mention of his dead wife should have made me uncomfortable, but instead, it made me feel honored. He was comparing me to the woman he had loved most in the world, suggesting that I might be worthy of similar respect and affection. The children began to call me Mutt Amy, Mother Amy, a title that filled me with both joy and responsibility. I took their education seriously, teaching them English grammar and arithmetic, while they taught me German vocabulary and customs. We would spend evenings by the fire, reading stories and sharing dreams about the future. When I'm grown, Gretchen announced one snowy evening, I want to be a teacher like you, Amy. I want to help children learn things, and I want to be a clockmaker like Papa, Carl added, his young face serious with determination. But I want to make clocks that are even more beautiful than his. These conversations filled me with hope and purpose. I was not just caring for these children. I was helping to shape their futures, giving them the love and guidance they needed to become good people. One particularly cold December evening, as we sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed, Becker surprised me with a gift, a beautiful shawl made of soft wool in shades of blue and green. For you, he said simply, his voice warm with genuine affection. You work hard, care for my children like they are your own. You deserve something beautiful. I had never owned anything beautiful before. As I wrapped the shawl around my shoulders, feeling its warmth and softness, tears came to my eyes. Danke, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. 9, Amelia. I thank you. You have given my children back their childhood, given this house back its heart. You are. He paused, searching for the English words. You are blessing. That night, as I lay in my comfortable bed wearing my beautiful shawl, I felt something I had never experienced before. Complete contentment. I had a home, a family, a purpose. Carl and Gretchen loved me, and I loved them with a fierce protectiveness that surprised me with its intensity. I began to dream of the future with an optimism that would have seemed impossible just months before. Perhaps when Carl and Gretchen were grown, Becker would grant me my freedom. Perhaps I could stay in the valley, maybe even marry one of the free black men who worked in town. Perhaps the children would visit me, bringing their own children to meet the woman who had helped raise them. These dreams sustained me through the winter months as I taught Gretchen to sew and helped Carl with his studies. I was no longer Amelia the slave. I was Mud Amy, the woman who had brought love back to a grieving family. The German community had fully accepted me as part of Becker's household. I attended church services, participated in community gatherings, and was treated with the respect due to a valued family member. The other women shared recipes and household tips with me, while the men discussed business matters with Becker in my presence as if I were his wife rather than his property. You have made Wilhelm a new man, Pastor Aber told me one Sunday after service. The grief was consuming him, but you have brought joy back to his life. I treasured these words, storing them in my heart like precious gems. For the first time in my life, I felt valued not for my labor or my body, but for my character and my contributions to the lives of others. The winter passed peacefully with cozy evenings by the fire and quiet days spent in domestic pursuits. I learned to knit from Mrs. Zimmerman, to preserve fruits and vegetables from Mrs. Hoffman, and to prepare traditional German dishes from several of the older women in the community. Carl grew taller and more serious, taking on more responsibilities around the house and workshop. Gretchen blossomed into a bright, curious girl who asked endless questions about everything from astronomy to botany. Both children seemed genuinely happy, their earlier grief replaced by the security of knowing they were loved and cared for. It was a beautiful illusion, carefully crafted by a man who understood that the strongest chains are made not of iron, but of love and obligation. Wilhelm Becker had not bought me to be his slave. He had bought me to be his victim. But first, he needed me to love his children so much that I would never risk their welfare by trying to escape. The trap was perfectly set, and I walked into it willingly, grateful for the privilege of my own enslavement. It would be months before I understood the true horror of my situation, and by then it would be far too late to escape without destroying the children I had come to love as my own. But that winter, wrapped in my beautiful shawl and surrounded by the laughter of happy children, I was simply a young woman who had found her place in the world. The fact that this place was a carefully constructed prison would become clear soon enough. For now I was content to be Mutter, beloved by 2 children, and valued by their father. It was more than I had ever dared hope for, and I treasured every moment of it, unaware that each day of happiness was bringing me closer to a revelation that would shatter my world and transform me into something I never thought I could become. Spring came early to the Shenandoah Valley in 1849, and with it came my 20th birthday, though I was the only one who knew the significance of the date. I had been with the Becker family for 6 months, and in that time I had become so thoroughly integrated into their lives that I sometimes forgot I was property rather than family. The children had grown taller and more confident under my care. Carl was developing into a thoughtful young man, his English now fluent enough that he could help his father with customers in the clock shop. He had begun to show real aptitude for the clockmaking trade, spending hours in the workshop learning to handle the delicate tools and mechanisms. "Amy, look what Papa taught me," he said one morning, proudly showing me a small gear he had crafted himself. "He says I have steady hands like Mama did." Gretchen had blossomed from a shy, grieving child into a bright, curious girl who chatted constantly about her dreams of becoming a teacher. She had begun helping me with household tasks, eager to learn the skills she would need as a woman. "Amy," she said one morning as I braided her hair, "when I'm grown up, will you help me teach children? You're so good at explaining things." "Of course, Liebling," I replied, using the German endearment I had learned. "We'll teach them together." It was a promise I meant with all my heart, though I had no idea how hollow it would soon become. The revelation came on a warm April evening, 3 days after what I privately celebrated as my birthday. The children were asleep, and I was in the kitchen cleaning the dinner dishes when Becker appeared in the doorway. Something in his posture made me look up. He stood differently, more rigid, with an expression I had never seen before. His usual gentle demeanor was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. The kind man who had taught me German and praised my care of his children had vanished, leaving behind a stranger whose eyes held a predatory gleam that made my blood run cold. "Amelia," he said, his voice carrying a strange formality that I had never heard before. "Come with me. We must talk." I followed him to his bedroom, a room I had only entered to clean and had always found slightly unsettling. It was dominated by a large bed and a portrait of his deceased wife, Eliza, whose painted eyes seemed to watch everything with sad knowledge. Tonight, those painted eyes seemed to hold a warning that I was only beginning to understand. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a chair beside his desk. The change in his tone sent a chill through me. This was not the kind, patient man who had taught me German and praised my care of his children. This was someone else entirely. Someone cold and calculating whose very presence made the air in the room feel thick and oppressive. "You have been here 6 months, he began, his English suddenly more precise, as if he had been deliberately speaking poorly before. "You have done well with Carl and Gretchen. They love you, ja, they trust you completely." "Yes, sir," I replied, confused by the direction of the conversation and increasingly frightened by the transformation I was witnessing. Gut. This was necessary. "You see, Amelia, I did not buy you to be governess. I bought you for different purpose entirely." The room seemed to grow colder as he spoke. I could feel something terrible approaching, like a storm on the horizon that would destroy everything in its path. "I bought you to be my wife. Not legal wife, Vahan, but wife in all ways that matter. You will share my bed, bear my children, and raise them alongside Carl and Gretchen." The words hit me like physical blows, each one driving the breath from my lungs and the hope from my heart. "Sir, I don't understand. You understand perfectly." His voice was ice cold now, devoid of any trace of the warmth I had grown to trust. "You are young, healthy, pure. You will give me strong sons to carry on my name, and you will never leave. Because if you try, I will kill Carl and Gretchen. If you resist me, I will sell you to the brothel in Richmond, where you will service 20 men a day until you die of disease." I stared at him in horror, seeing clearly for the first time the monster that had been hiding behind the mask of kindness. The gentle father figure, who had seemed so different from other masters, was revealed as something far worse. A predator who had spent months grooming both me and his children for this moment. "The children? You would hurt your own children. They are not my children," he said with casual cruelty that took my breath away. "Eliza was already pregnant when I married her. I took her because she had property I wanted, and I kept the children because they were useful. Now they are useful again as leverage to ensure your cooperation. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Carl and Gretchen, whom I loved as my own, were not even his biological children. He had been using them as tools of manipulation from the very beginning. Their love and trust nothing more than weapons in his arsenal of control. You see now, yeah, you love them. They love you. You would do anything to protect them, and they would be heartbroken if anything happened to you. It is perfect arrangement. You're a monster, I whispered, the words barely audible through my shock and revulsion. I am practical, man, he replied with a smile that chilled me to the bone. I need sons. You need protection. Carl and Gretchen need mother figure. Everyone gets what they need. What about Eliza? What really happened to her? His smile was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen, an expression of such casual evil that it made my skin crawl. Eliza served her purpose. She gave me respectability in the community, helped me establish my business. But she was weak, sickly. When she began to resist my attentions, she became liability. You killed her. I helped her find peace, a little arsenic in her medicine. The doctor said it was fever. Very sad, very tragic. The whole community mourned. I felt sick, understanding now why Eliza's portrait seemed so haunting. She had been trapped just as I was trapped, used and discarded when she was no longer useful. The woman whose memory I had honored, whose children I had loved, had been murdered by the man who now planned to do the same to me. Now, Becker continued, standing and beginning to remove his shirt with deliberate slowness. We will begin your real education. You will learn to please me, to serve me, to give me what I need, and you will do it willingly because the alternative is unthinkable. What followed was the destruction of everything I had believed about my new life. Becker's assault was methodical and brutal, designed not just to violate my body, but to break my spirit completely. He wanted me to understand that the kindness I had experienced was an illusion, that I was nothing more than property to be used for his pleasure. You belong to me, he whispered as he hurt me, his words punctuated by acts of violence that left me gasping and broken. Every part of you, every breath you take, every thought in your head. You exist for my pleasure and my children. Nothing else matters. The pain was overwhelming, but worse than the physical agony was the psychological torture of understanding how completely I had been deceived. Every kindness, every gentle word, every moment of seeming affection had been calculated to bring me to this point of absolute vulnerability. When it was over, he gave me instructions that made my blood run cold. I was to continue caring for Carl and Gretchen as if nothing had changed. I was to maintain the facade of the happy family, to smile and laugh and play the role of the devoted governess. And every night I was to come to his room and submit to whatever he demanded. If you show any sign of distress around the children, if you give them any reason to suspect what happens here, I will make their death slow and painful. Do you understand? Yes, I whispered, the word torn from my throat like a piece of my soul. Gut. Now clean yourself and go to bed. Tomorrow you will be the same loving Amy they adore, and tomorrow night you will return here and we will continue your education. I stumbled back to my room, my body aching and my mind reeling from the revelation of my true situation. I was not a beloved family member. I was a prisoner in a cage made of love and obligation. Becker had spent 6 months teaching me to love Carl and Gretchen so completely that I would endure any horror to protect them. As I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had happened, I heard a soft knock at my door. My heart stopped. Had one of the children heard something? Had my carefully constructed world already begun to crumble? Amy. It was Gretchen's voice, small and worried. Are you all right? I heard sounds. I forced my voice to remain steady, though every word felt like swallowing glass. I'm fine, Liebling. Just had a bad dream. Go back to sleep. Can I sleep with you tonight? I had a bad dream too. Every instinct screamed at me to send her away to protect her from any contamination of what had just happened. But I also knew that any change in my behavior would be noticed and punished, and the consequences would fall not just on me, but on this innocent child who trusted me completely. "Of course, sweetheart, come in." Gretchen climbed into bed beside me, her small body warm and trusting against mine. As she settled into sleep, I held her close and felt something cold and hard crystallizing in my chest. This child, who called me mother and loved me with pure innocence, was being used as a weapon against me by a man who cared nothing for her welfare. Wilhelm Becker thought he had broken me, thought he had created the perfect victim, but he had made a crucial error. He had taught me to love Carl and Gretchen so completely that I would do anything to protect them, including destroying the monster who threatened them. I was no longer the naive girl who had arrived 6 months ago. I was a woman who had learned the true nature of evil, and I was already beginning to plan my revenge. Becker wanted a wife and mother for his children. He would get exactly what he asked for, and it would destroy him. The war between us had begun, though he didn't know it yet, and before it was over, one of us would be dead. As I held Gretchen's sleeping form and listened to the gentle ticking of Becker's clocks, I made a vow that would sustain me through the dark months ahead. I would protect these children no matter the cost to myself. I would find a way to free us all from this monster's control, and I would make Wilhelm Becker pay for every moment of suffering he had inflicted on Eliza, on me, and on the innocent children he was using as pawns in his sick game. The transformation had begun. The loving governess was learning to become something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The months that followed my awakening to Becker's true nature were a masterclass in survival and deception. By day, I remained the devoted mutt Amy, caring for Carl and Gretchen with genuine love while maintaining the facade of contentment. By night, I endured Becker's violations while carefully studying his habits, his weaknesses, and his methods. The dual existence was exhausting in ways I had never imagined. Each morning, I had to transform myself from a broken victim into a loving mother figure, hiding the bruises and emotional wounds that Becker inflicted with increasing frequency. The children, bless their innocent hearts, noticed nothing amiss in those early weeks. Trusting completely in the illusion of normalcy I worked so hard to maintain, I learned that Becker was far more intelligent and calculating than his broken English had suggested. He spoke perfect English when we were alone, having deliberately maintained the immigrant persona to appear less threatening to his neighbors. He was also well educated with books on chemistry, medicine, and botany hidden in his workshop alongside his clockmaking tools. "You are learning quickly," he said one night after a particularly brutal session, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a teacher pleased with his students' progress. Eliza took months to become so compliant. These casual references to Eliza became a source of valuable information. I began to understand that I was not Becker's first victim, but rather the latest in a pattern of abuse that had been perfected over years of practice. "What happened to her children's real father?" I asked one night, testing how much he would reveal when his guard was down. "Died in a farming accident." Very convenient. I was able to comfort the widow, marry her quickly, and gain control of her property. The children never knew I wasn't their real father. The casual way he spoke of orchestrating a man's death chilled me, but it also provided valuable information. Becker was not just a rapist and murderer. He was a predator who had been perfecting his methods for years, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. I began to understand the full scope of his plan. He intended to keep me pregnant and isolated, using the children as emotional hostages while building a new family under his complete control. Any sons I bore would be raised to continue his legacy, while daughters would be trained to serve his needs. It was a generational cycle of abuse that would continue long after I was dead. But Becker had underestimated the depth of my intelligence and my capacity for long-term planning. While he thought he was breaking me, I was actually learning from him, studying his methods so I could turn them against him. My first discovery came 3 months into my captivity, when I found Eliza's diary hidden behind a loose board in the root cellar written in German, which I was now learning to read with increasing fluency. It told the story of another young woman who had been trapped by Becker's false kindness. The diary entries began hopefully describing a kind widower who had rescued her from poverty and given her children a father figure. But as the months progressed, The tone changed dramatically. "He is not what he seems," Eliza had written in increasingly shaky handwriting. "The children are not his, but he uses them to control me. I cannot leave them, cannot let them suffer from my resistance. But I fear what he will do when he tires of me." The entries detailed a pattern of escalating abuse that mirrored my own experience. Becker had groomed Eliza just as he had groomed me, using kindness and false affection to create emotional bonds that could then be exploited. The final entries were heartbreaking. "I am with child again, but this one feels different weak. I think he is poisoning me, slowly making me sick so the pregnancy will fail. He wants me gone but needs it to look natural." Eliza had known she was being murdered, but had been powerless to stop it. She had died protecting Carl and Gretchen just as Becker expected me to live protecting them. But I would not make Eliza's mistake. I would not simply endure until he decided to dispose of me. I would fight back and I would win. My opportunity came when I discovered that Becker kept arsenic in his workshop, the same poison he had used to kill Eliza. He used it in small amounts for his clock making, treating metal components to prevent corrosion. But I knew from Eliza's diary that larger doses could kill slowly, mimicking the symptoms of various illnesses. The workshop became my classroom in the art of revenge. While Becker believed I was simply cleaning and organizing his tools, I was actually studying his methods and gathering the materials I would need for my own campaign of justice. I began my campaign of revenge with patience that would have impressed Marcus Aurelius himself. Her tiny amount of arsenic in Becker's coffee each morning, so small that the symptoms would develop gradually. Stomach pains, fatigue, confusion, all easily attributed to overwork or age. The key was consistency and subtlety. Too much poison too quickly would raise suspicions, but a steady, minimal dose would create the appearance of natural illness while slowly weakening his body and mind. While I slowly poisoned his body, I began working on his mind. I started asking questions about Eliza, expressing curiosity about the woman whose place I had taken. She was beautiful, yeah, I would say while serving his dinner, my voice carefully modulated to sound merely curious rather than suspicious. "The children speak of her with such love." "Eliza was adequate," he would reply dismissively, but I could see the flash of concern in his eyes. "But she was weak. You are stronger." I found some of her things in the root cellar, her sewing box, some letters. Should I throw them away? I watched his face carefully as I spoke, noting the way his jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed. He didn't know about the diary, but he was worried about what other evidence Eliza might have left behind. "Yeah, throw them away. The past is past." But I kept everything, studying Eliza's possessions for clues about Becker's methods and weaknesses. I found letters from other German immigrants, business correspondence that revealed his financial situation, and most importantly, a small vial of medicine that Eliza had been taking for her illness. When I tested the medicine with a piece of silver jewelry, a trick I had learned from reading about poison detection in one of Becker's hidden books, the metal turned black immediately. The medicine was pure arsenic, confirming that Becker had been slowly murdering his wife while pretending to care for her health. This discovery filled me with a cold rage that burned hotter than any emotion I had ever experienced. Becker was not just my tormentor. He was a calculating killer who had perfected his methods through practice on other victims. As Becker's health began to decline from my daily doses of poison, I started the second phase of my plan, preparing Carl and Gretchen for the truth. I couldn't tell them directly. They were too young and too trusting, but I could plant seeds of doubt about their father's character. "Your papa seems tired lately," I would say to Carl while we worked together in the garden. "Has he always been so stern with you?" "He's been different since Mama died," Carl replied thoughtfully, his young face serious with the weight of memories. "Angrier. Sometimes I hear him talking to himself in his room, saying things about Mama that don't sound nice." "What kind of things?" "That she was weak, that she disappointed him." "But Mama wasn't weak, Amy. She was the strongest person I knew." I could see Carl beginning to question the narrative he had been given about his mother's death. The boy was intelligent and observant, and he was starting to notice inconsistencies in his father's stories. Gretchen, being younger, was less aware of the undercurrents. but she had begun to notice that I seemed sad sometimes despite my efforts to hide it. "Amy, why do you cry at night?" she asked one morning as I braided her hair, her blue eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "Do I cry, Liebling? I didn't realize. Sometimes I hear you. Are you sad about something? Just missing my old home sometimes." I lied, hating myself for deceiving this innocent child. "But I'm happy here with you and Carl. We're happy you're here too. Papa is much nicer when you're around." This innocent comment revealed something important. Becker's behavior changed when the children were present. He maintained his facade of the caring father, which meant he was still vulnerable to their opinion of him. By winter, Becker was noticeably ill. He had lost weight. His hands shook when he worked on his clocks, and he frequently complained of stomach pains and headaches. The local doctor attributed it to overwork and prescribed rest, having no idea that his patient was being slowly poisoned. "You must take better care of yourself, Wilhelm," Dr. Eber told him during one visit, his voice heavy with professional concern. "Perhaps you should consider hiring help for the shop." "9," Becker replied weakly, his pride preventing him from admitting vulnerability. I can manage, but he couldn't manage, and his illness was making him careless. He began drinking more heavily to dull the pain, which made him sloppy in his treatment of me. Sometimes he would forget to lock his workshop, giving me access to more arsenic and other potentially useful materials. Other times he would fall asleep before I could return to my room, allowing me to search his possessions for more evidence. It was during one of these searches that I found his most damning secret, a collection of letters from other widowers inquiring about purchasing domestic help with specific qualifications. Becker was not just a predator. He was part of a network that traded in young women for sexual slavery. The letters revealed that Eliza had not been his first victim. There had been others, women who had died of illness or run away after serving their purpose. I was simply the latest in a long line of victims, chosen for my youth and supposed purity. One letter in particular made my blood run cold. "Wilhelm, I am in need of a replacement for my previous domestic. She became troublesome and had to be disposed of. I require someone young, preferably untrained, who can be molded to my specific needs. Your previous recommendations have been satisfactory. What do you currently have available?" This discovery filled me with a rage so pure and focused that it burned away any remaining traces of the frightened girl I had once been. Becker was not just my tormentor. He was a serial killer who had destroyed countless lives and planned to continue his crimes indefinitely. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Gretchen's peaceful breathing beside me, I made my final decision. Becker would not live to claim another victim. I would not simply escape. I would ensure that his reign of terror ended forever. The time for patience was over. The time for justice had come, and I would deliver it with the same methodical precision that Becker had used to destroy so many lives. He had taught me well, and now he would face a student who had surpassed her teacher. By spring of 1850, Wilhelm Becker was a shadow of his former self. The arsenic I had been administering daily for 8 months had taken its toll. His once robust frame was gaunt. His hands trembled constantly, and his mind had begun to wander. The local doctor was baffled by his mysterious illness, prescribing various tonics that only masked the symptoms while the poison continued its relentless work. But Becker's physical deterioration was nothing compared to the psychological warfare I had been waging. I had carefully, methodically destroyed his sense of security and control while maintaining the facade of the devoted caregiver. "Papa's getting sicker," Carl observed one evening as we watched Becker struggle to eat his dinner, his hands shaking so badly that he could barely hold his spoon. "Maybe we should send for a specialist from Richmond." "The doctor says it's just overwork," I replied gently, my voice carrying just the right note of concern. "Your papa is strong. He'll recover." But I could see the doubt growing in Carl's eyes. At 14, he was old enough to recognize that his father's illness was not natural. More importantly, he had begun to notice things. The way Becker looked at me when he thought no one was watching, the sounds that came from his room at night, the fear that sometimes flickered across my face despite my efforts to hide it. Gretchen, now 12, was still largely innocent of the darker currents in our household. but she had developed a fierce protectiveness toward me that sometimes surprised me with its intensity. "Why does Papa make you go to his room every night?" she asked me one morning, her blue eyes serious beyond her years. "He needs help with his medicine," I lied smoothly, hating myself for deceiving her but knowing it was necessary. "The illness makes him confused sometimes." "You don't like going there, I can tell." The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. Despite my careful acting, Gretchen could sense my distress. It was time to begin preparing her for what was coming. "Sometimes taking care of sick people is difficult," I said carefully. "But we do it because we love them." "Yeah. I love you more than Papa," she said with startling honesty. That made my heart ache. "If something happened to you, I would be very angry." This declaration gave me both hope and terror. The children's love for me was genuine, but it also meant they would be devastated by what I was planning. Yet I knew that their temporary pain was preferable to a lifetime under Becker's control. The final phase of my plan began on a cold March evening when Becker, weakened by months of poisoning, made a crucial mistake. He had been drinking heavily to dull his pain, and in his intoxicated state, he spoke carelessly in front of Carl. "Your precious Amy," he slurred, his words thick with alcohol and malice. "She's not what you think. She's mine. Belongs to me completely. Every night she comes to me. Does whatever I want." Carl's face went white with understanding and rage. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your beloved governess is my whore," Becker continued, too drunk to realize the danger of his words. "Bought and paid for, just like Eliza was. And when I'm tired of her, I'll find another." The sound of Carl's chair hitting the floor echoed through the house as he stood abruptly, his young face contorted with shock and fury. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask her. Ask your precious Amy what she does in my room every night." I saw the moment when Carl's world shattered. The boy who had trusted his father completely suddenly understood the true nature of our household. His eyes met mine across the table, and I saw recognition, horror, and a burning rage that reminded me of myself. "Carl," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting around us, "take Gretchen upstairs now. But Amy, now after the children left." Becker turned his drunken attention back to me, his face flushed with alcohol and cruel satisfaction. "You see, now they know what you really are. How does it feel to lose their respect?" "I think you'll find," I said calmly, meeting his bloodshot eyes without flinching, "that Carl is old enough to understand the difference between victim and victimizer." The next morning, Carl confronted me while Gretchen was in town with neighbors. His young face was etched with pain and determination, aged beyond his years by the terrible knowledge he now carried. "Is it true?" he asked without preamble, his voice barely controlled. "What he said about you and him? I could have lied, could have protected him from the ugly truth, but Carl deserved honesty, and I needed an ally for what was coming." "Yes," I said simply, the word hanging in the air between us like a confession. "It's true." "For how long?" "Since my first night here, everything before that, the kindness, the family feeling. It was all a lie to make me compliant." Carl's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with suppressed rage. "And Eliza, my mother, he killed her slowly with poison when she tried to resist him. I found her diary. The boy I had helped raise into a young man stared at me with eyes that had aged years in a single conversation. What are we going to do? We are going to do nothing. I am going to end this." "How?" I showed him the vial of arsenic I had been using, explaining how I had been slowly poisoning Becker for months. Carl listened with a mixture of horror and admiration, his intelligent mind quickly grasping the implications of what I was telling him. "You've been planning this the whole time. Since the night I learned the truth, he thinks he broke me. But he only made me stronger and smarter. What about Gretchen? She doesn't know. She doesn't need to know the details, but she needs to be prepared for what's coming." That evening, I gave Becker his final dose. Enough arsenic to kill a healthy man, let alone one weakened by months of gradual poisoning. I mixed it into his evening whiskey, watching as he drank it down without suspicion, his dulled senses unable to detect the bitter taste that would have warned a more alert man. "You seem different tonight," he observed, his words already beginning to slur as the massive dose began to take effect. "More compliant." "I've accepted my fate," I lied, my voice steady and calm. "There's no point in fighting anymore. Gut. I was beginning to think I would need to discipline you more severely." Within an hour, the massive dose began to take effect. Becker doubled over with stomach cramps, his face turning gray as the poison coursed through his system. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breathing became labored and irregular. "Something's wrong," he gasped, clutching his stomach as waves of agony washed over him. "Get the doctor." "I'm afraid it's too late for doctors," I said calmly, my voice devoid of any sympathy or concern. "You're dying, Wilhelm, just like Eliza died, just like all your other victims died." The realization dawned in his eyes as the poison took hold, his pupils dilating with shock and understanding. You've been poisoning me every day for 8 months, the same poison you used on Eliza, the same method you've used on others." "I found your letters, Wilhelm. I know about all of them." He tried to stand to reach for me, but his legs gave out and he collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing as the toxins ravaged his system. "The children, and they'll never forgive you. The children will understand that I freed them from a monster. Carl already knows what you are. Gretchen will learn in time." As Becker writhed on the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps, I knelt beside him and spoke in the same calm tone he had used when explaining my fate to me that first terrible night. "You said I belonged to you completely. You were wrong. I belonged to myself and to the children you used to control me. And now I'm taking back everything you stole. Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible as foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. "The antidote in my workshop. There is no antidote for what you've done. To me, to Eliza, to all the others. This is justice, Wilhelm. This is what you deserve." I watched him die slowly, just as he had watched Eliza die, just as he had planned to watch me die when he tired of me. There was no mercy in my heart, no regret for what I was doing. This man had forfeited his right to life the moment he chose to destroy others for his pleasure. His final moments were filled with the same terror and helplessness that he had inflicted on his victims. As his breathing grew more labored and his movements became weaker, I saw in his eyes the recognition of his own mortality and the understanding that his reign of terror was finally over. When it was over, when Wilhelm Becker drew his last shuddering breath, I felt a profound sense of completion. The monster who had destroyed so many lives was dead, and the world was a safer place without him. I calmly set fire to his workshop, making sure to destroy all evidence of his crimes, the arsenic, the letters, the tools of his trade. The flames consumed everything, turning years of careful planning and meticulous record-keeping into ash and smoke. To the outside world, it would appear that Wilhelm Becker had died of his mysterious illness, and that a tragic fire had claimed his workshop. No one would suspect that the devoted governess who had tried so hard to save him was actually his killer. Carl found me in the kitchen an hour later, calmly preparing breakfast as if nothing had happened. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, and through the window, we could see the smoldering remains of the workshop. "Is it done?" he asked quietly, his young face grave with the weight of what we both knew had transpired. "It's done. We're free. What happens now? Now we take Gretchen and leave this place. We'll go north where no one knows us. We'll be a family, a real family this time." When Gretchen woke to find her father dead and the workshop burned, she was devastated, but not suspicious. Carl and I comforted her, explaining that Papa had been very sick and that sometimes sick people died suddenly. The fire, we told her, had been an accident, perhaps a candle left burning in the workshop. "Will you stay with us?" she asked me through her tears, her small hands clutching mine desperately. "Always," I promised, meaning every word. "We'll stay together, the three of us, forever." The funeral was well attended, with the entire German community coming to pay their respects to the clockmaker who had been such a valued member of their society. I played the role of the grieving governess perfectly, accepting condolences and support from neighbors who had no idea of the monster they were mourning. Wilhelm was a good man, Pastor Eber told me as we stood beside the grave. He would want you to continue caring for his children. I will, I replied, my voice appropriately subdued. They are all I have left of him. We left Virginia a week after Becker's funeral, taking what money we could find and heading north toward freedom. I had discovered a substantial sum hidden in Becker's personal effects, money that I suspected had come from his trafficking activities. It would be enough to start a new life in a place where no one knew our history. The German community mourned the loss of their clockmaker, never suspecting that the devoted governess who had tried so hard to save him was actually his killer. They saw only a woman who had lost her employer and protector, bravely taking responsibility for 2 orphaned children. The journey north was long and difficult, but it was also liberating. With each mile we put between ourselves and the Shenandoah Valley, I felt the weight of my captivity lifting from my shoulders. Carl and Gretchen, despite their grief, seemed to sense the change in our circumstances. There was a lightness in their step that had been absent for months. In Canada, we built a new life together. I legally adopted Carl and Gretchen, and they took my surname, Blackwood, after the plantation where I had been born. It seemed fitting that the name of my former master should become the foundation of our new family's identity. Carl grew into a remarkable young man, driven by a desire to heal rather than harm. He studied medicine with an intensity that sometimes worried me, but I understood his motivation. He had seen the damage that evil men could do, and he wanted to spend his life repairing that damage. I want to help people who have been hurt, he told me one day as he prepared for his medical examinations. People like you, like Mama Eliza, people who have suffered and need healing. Gretchen became a teacher, dedicating her life to protecting children from the kind of monsters we had escaped. She established one of the first schools for immigrant children in Toronto, creating a safe haven for young people who had been displaced by circumstances beyond their control. Every child deserves to feel safe and loved, she would say when people asked about her motivation. No child should ever have to fear the adults who are supposed to protect them. They never spoke of what they knew about their father's true nature, protecting me just as I had protected them. To the world, we were simply a family who had survived tragedy together. The official story was that Wilhelm Becker had died of illness, leaving his devoted governess to care for his orphaned children. But in the privacy of our home, we sometimes spoke of the truth. Carl and Gretchen understood that I had killed their father, and they supported my decision completely. They had seen enough of his true nature to know that he was a monster who would have continued to cause suffering if I hadn't stopped him. "You saved us," Gretchen said one evening as we sat together in our comfortable parlor in Toronto. "Not just from him, but from becoming like him. You showed us what real love looks like. You taught us that family is choice, not blood." Carl added, his voice warm with affection, "You chose to love us, and we chose to love you back. That's what makes us a family." I lived to be 73, dying peacefully in 1886, surrounded by Carl, Gretchen, and their children. My grandchildren, for that's what they truly were, regardless of blood, grew up knowing only love and security. They never knew the darkness that had brought us together, only the light that had sustained us through the years. My tombstone bore the simple inscription they chose, "Mutter Amy." She taught us that family is choice, not blood. It was a fitting epitaph for a woman who had chosen love over hatred, justice over revenge, and family over blood. I never regretted killing Wilhelm Becker. He was a predator who had destroyed countless lives and would have continued destroying them if I hadn't stopped him. In ending his life, I had saved not only myself and the children I loved, but all the future victims he would never claim. Some might call me a murderer. I prefer to think of myself as an instrument of justice, a woman who refused to accept that evil should triumph simply because it wore a mask of respectability. I had been sold as property, treated as an object, and used as a tool of manipulation. But in the end, I had proven that even the most powerless could find ways to fight back against their oppressors. Wilhelm Becker thought he had bought a victim. Instead, he had created an avenger, and in the end, that mistake cost him everything. The letters I found in his workshop revealed a network of predators that stretched across several states. Before leaving Virginia, I had anonymously sent copies of these letters to law enforcement officials in Richmond and Washington. Several arrests were made in the months that followed, though I never learned the full extent of the investigation. Carl became one of the most respected physicians in Toronto, specializing in treating women who had suffered abuse. He never married, dedicating his life entirely to his medical practice and to caring for the family we had built together. Gretchen married a kind man who shared her passion for education, and together they established a network of schools throughout Ontario. She had 4 children of her own, all of whom grew up calling me grandmother and learning the values of compassion and justice that we had fought so hard to preserve. In my final years, I often reflected on the journey that had brought me from slavery to freedom, from victim to survivor, from property to matriarch of a loving family. It had been a path marked by darkness and violence, but it had led to light and love. The young woman who had been sold for her purity had become something far more valuable, a protector, a teacher, and a living example of the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most terrible circumstances. I had been broken and rebuilt, destroyed and reborn, enslaved and liberated. And in the end, I had won. Not just survival, but triumph. Not just escape, but justice. Not just freedom, but family. Wilhelm Becker had tried to own my body, my mind, and my soul. But he had failed to understand that some things cannot be purchased no matter the price. Love, courage, and the will to fight for what is right. These are gifts that belong to the human spirit, and no amount of money or power can take them away. I died as I had lived in those final decades, surrounded by love, secure in the knowledge that I had made the world a better place by removing a monster from it. My last words were for Carl and Gretchen, the children who had become my salvation, just as I had become theirs. "Thank you," I whispered, as they held my hands in those final moments. "Thank you for teaching me what family really means." And as I closed my eyes for the last time, I felt no regret, no fear, only gratitude for a life that had been transformed from tragedy into triumph through the power of love and the courage to fight for justice. This was the story of Amelia. After fleeing to Canada with Carl and Gretchen, she legally adopted them, and they lived as a family for the rest of their lives. Carl became a prominent physician in Toronto, while Gretchen established one of the first schools for immigrant children. Neither ever married, dedicating their lives to caring for others as Amelia had cared for them. Amelia died peacefully in 1886, and her grave in Mount Pleasant Cemetery became a place of pilgrimage for women who had survived domestic violence. Her story was passed down through the families Carl and Gretchen helped remembered as proof that even the most powerless could find ways to fight back against their oppressors. The network of predators that Becker had been part of was largely dismantled, following the anonymous submission of his correspondence to authorities, leading to dozens of arrests and the rescue of numerous victims across the American South. The echoes of Amelia's courage and calculated justice reverberate through time, a stark reminder that survival sometimes requires becoming what others fear most. Her story illuminates the complex moral landscape of those who must choose between passive victimhood and active resistance, showing that love can be both the strongest chain and the most powerful weapon. What hit you hardest in Amelia's story? The betrayal, the unbreakable bond with the children, or that final act of calculated fire? Drop a comment below, smash that like button if this tale of hidden strength moved you, and subscribe for more gripping, true-inspired stories from America's shadowed past. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next one, because every week, we're uncovering voices that refuse to be silenced. See you in the next tale.